be introduced this upcoming Friday, the 16th. And then the last of our 3 bills this year in our legislative package is Wolverine restoration. So this would revive an effort that CPW has been interested in for decades now. The restoration of wolverines in Colorado's high elevation habitat will assist nationwide conservation efforts for the species, and it'll also support our goal of enhancing biodiversity by restoring a native species to Colorado's landscape. So as I'm sure you know, this is not a new thing. CPW has been building off of stakeholder engagement efforts that we started in the early 2000s, and we've been meeting with folks all across the state, from the agricultural industry, from the ski industry, winter recreation, and much more. And so we've been really trying to make sure that we're getting a lot of stakeholder engagement done for this. As I'm sure you might have seen, the Fish and Wildlife Service did list the North American wolverine as threatened under the Federal Endangered Species Act back at the end of November in 2023. Along with that listing decision, the service did issue an interim 4D rule and plans to have a final 4D rule in place by this upcoming December of 2024. So essentially, the 4D rule provides exemptions for take of a threatened species, so in this case, the wolverine. There was a public comment period on this interim 4D rule, and that ended at the end of January. CPW worked really closely with a lot of stakeholders, with other Western states, and as well as other federal agencies, including the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Park Service, Forest Service, et cetera, to develop our comments on this interim rule. And we ultimately asked for some exemptions in the final 4D rule, specifically for certain activities within the agricultural industry, ski industry, and more. So we are currently plugging away at our draft language on this one, and are really trying to take into account all the things we've heard from stakeholders in the last couple of months. And so our legislation will be sponsored by a bipartisan group as well. We have Senator Will and Representatives Morrow and McLaughlin, and this one is also scheduled to be introduced this upcoming Friday. So hopefully we'll have some more updates for you all in the upcoming week or two, not only on the wolverine restoration bill, but also our technical cleanup bill. And definitely feel free to tune into our hearing next Thursday for the invertebrates and rare plants bill. And with that, if we have some time, I'm happy to take some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, how are they going to fund that for House Bill 117 for CPW?
Thanks, Sarah. John, any questions for Sarah?
I believe Roger was asking a question, and I'll monitor the attendees. Attendees, if you have questions, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then I'll relay it. I believe the same question Brandon Diamond just typed in the chat is how the rare plant and invertebrate program would be funded. That seems to be the one question we have right now.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the question. There is a line in the bill that says that Species Conservation Trust Fund dollars will now be able to be used for rare plant and invertebrate conservation. However, we also include Wildlife Cash Fund, however, with the exception that we won't be using revenue generated from hunting and fishing licenses.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Anything else, John?
No, we got a question about a draft of the Wolverine bill being available for reading. I believe there's a link to that on the Colorado's legislative portion of the website. I'll provide a link to that for folks in the chat.
Yeah, and John, I guess I'll add it as well. We also have fact sheets for each of our legislative initiatives this year, so happy to share those out with the group after the call as well.
Yeah, and Sarah, and if you have any of the links to those online, if you want to maybe just drop those in the chat for folks to read over, kind of bookmark and save those for later, that'd be great.
Will do. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm already to my first apology. I should have turned it over to Roger or Mia if y'all had any opening comments. So we'll do that now while we're here. Sorry.
I just thought it was new. I was like, cool, I don't have to say anything. We can just move right along. So I'm Mia Anstein, and I live in La Plata County in the Southwest region. And I enjoy being on the round table to be able to be a voice for sports persons. And it is nice when I bump into people along the way as Corey mentioned, if you have something that you want to learn about, let us know so we can put it on the agenda, because it's nice to be able to work with CPW as much as we can. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
I would just, I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight and encourage the public to ask questions through the proper channels, through the chat. We have a lot of big issues in front of CPW currently, and most of them are, certainly not all, but some of them are on our agenda here tonight to discuss.
Thank you, Roger. I'll just throw it out there as a thank you too, also to Senator Will for popping in and listening to the issues, goods and bads, indifferent, whatever, here in the Southwest region. So thanks to everyone that joined, but definitely especially those few that are taking their time out of their evening. So moving on, Jamin, West Slope Mountain Lion Study Update.
Thanks, Corey. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining. I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the Southwest Region Senior Wildlife Biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, based out of the Durango Regional Office here. Let me see if I can share my screen and get this going and see if this is working all right. And then is that working, John or Corey? Can somebody let me know?
Yeah, we got you, Jamin. Looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, so I was just going to give a brief update on the Colorado West Slope Mountain Lion Management Plan that was adopted in 2020, as well as the mountain lion density monitoring that we currently have got ongoing on the Western Slope in a couple different study areas so far. So in September of 2020, we adopted the West Slope Lion Management Plan, and essentially what this did was consolidate 13 previous mountain lion DAUs into 2 larger DAUs to basically allowed us to manage mountain lions on a larger geographic scale. So one large DAU in the northwest portion of the state, or the northwest region of the state, and then another DAU encompassing the southwest region of the state. And then we have of course, individual hunt codes and quotas within that larger DAU. Many of you are fairly familiar with the West Slope Lion Management Plan at this point, and have seen some of this previously, but just give a brief update and talk about where we're currently at in terms of mountain lion monitoring on the West Slope. So as I mentioned, the West Slope used to be broken up into 13 management DAUs, 13 DAUs that we use to manage mountain lion populations across the West Slope. Those have been consolidated into 2 large DAUs now through the West Slope Mountain Lion Management Plan. And you can see those here on the left side of the screen. I should probably mention the East Slope is currently undergoing a similar process to develop an East Slope Mountain Lion Management Plan. Expect to hear more about that in the near future. They're currently heading into the public input portion of that, the public process, developing the draft plan and collecting input and input from various stakeholders on the East Slope. So expect to see more on the East Slope Lion Management Plan, or the draft plan, in the near future as they go through that process. So with the adoption of the West Slope Lion Management Plan in 2020, we the total quota, total mountain lion quota across the southwest portion of the state that was adopted is a harvest limit of 185 lions. And I'll talk a little bit about the individual hunt codes that make that up. But a harvest limit of 185 185 lions. That accounts for 11% of the abundance estimate from the resource selection function. So essentially, a resource selection function is just a habitat model that predicts how many lions could be on the landscape. And then we manage for a hunter harvest of 11% of that total. So harvest limit in the Southwest region of 185 lions. You can see the total harvest that we've achieved over the last 3 years has been slightly below that harvest limit, ranging from 67%, 68% to 88%. Okay, John just told me my slides aren't advancing. John, did that work?
Yeah, there you go, Jamin. We're starting to move through them now.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me just back up to this one. So it doesn't sound like my slides were advancing there. Sorry about that. This is the slide I was showing the Northwest region DAU and the Southwest region DAU. And then the right side of the screen there, the East Slope is currently working on developing the East Slope lion management plan. This screen or this slide just shows the harvest limits and total harvest for the last 3 years across the Southwest region. You can see we've ranged from 68% to 88% of our harvest limit for the last 3 years. And then, within the Southwest region DAU, we have these individual hunt codes that make up, say, the San Luis Valley, the Gunnison Basin, Uncompahgre Plateau area, Durango area, Southwest Colorado, so on and so forth. And you can see this is kind of a busy slide, probably difficult for everybody to see, but some of our hunt codes we've reached that quota the last couple of years. Others were quite a bit below reaching that quota. But anyway, for this upcoming year, we haven't proposed any changes to lion quotas. We'll maintain a status quo lion quota. And then we'll talk a little bit about the lion density monitoring that we're doing currently in the across the West Slope, across multiple different study areas, to basically, essentially, this is an attempt to truth the resource selection function model, the habitat model that predicts how many lions we have on the landscape. So we have a model that gives us a prediction of how many lions we should have on the landscape, and then we can actually go out and mark mountain lions, radio color mountain lions, get them on camera, and come up with density estimates to test those estimated numbers. So we are now completing our second year of density estimates in the Gunnison Basin. The first monitoring area was up in the Northwest region, up in the Middle Park area. And then the first density area in the Southwest region was the Gunnison Basin. And we're completing that second density estimate in the Gunnison Basin this winter. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll be moving to a new site in the Southwest region beginning next winter, while the Northwest region begins a new site up in the Book Cliffs area north of Grand Junction. So we through this density estimate study, we attempt to maintain a radio collared sample of 20 to 25 adult lions collared across the study area. Across a grid. This grid is actually for the Salida area. I didn't have a good slide for the Gunnison Basin grid, but it would be similar to this in the Gunnison Basin. But we do a grid of about approximately 80 1 kilometer squared cells. Each of those cells has a motion sensor camera within it, along with a predator call, essentially, that goes off at night that attracts the lions to the camera, and we can get lions on camera, and based on the percentage of marked lions or radio collared lions that we get on camera, we can get a pretty good density estimate to validate those resource selection function abundance models. So in the Gunnison Basin, we've handled and marked a total of 54 mountain lions over the last 2 years. 40 of those were adults that we radio collared. Somewhere around 21, 22 of those are currently on air and providing us these density estimates across the Gunnison Basin. So that's all been going really well. So as I mentioned, we've in the last 2 years handled 54 lions, radio colored 40 of those. We've last winter completed the first year of the Mark Site population estimate or density estimate, and then this year we're currently in year 2 of having that camera grid of 80 motion sensor cameras spread out across 81 1 square kilometer cells in the Gunnison Basin. We're currently collecting that second estimate this winter, and that should be complete in March of this year. So this is a slide that Mark Vieira, our carnivore manager, fur bearer manager, presented at the last Wildlife Commission meeting in Denver that shows the modeled estimates on the left in that table. The modeled estimates based on the resource selection function and what the habitat model predicts could be out there on the landscape, and then what we are actually measured in terms of a measured lion density here on the right. So I would say that the take home from this is that our lion populations are generally pretty healthy, doing pretty well, pretty stable across the landscape. Most of our field estimates, the measured density estimates from our study areas, are fairly similar to what the habitat model is predicting could be out on the landscape, and potentially even a little bit higher of lion density estimates in some areas, like along the Front Range here in Boulder. The measured density estimate is slightly higher than the modeled estimate. For the Slide area or the Upper Arkansas area, pretty similar to what the modeled estimate is. Middle Park also pretty similar. And then in Gunnison, the first year estimate was slightly higher than what the modeled resource selection function estimate was. We'll see if that holds for a second year here, and see if those high densities continue for this second year. And then the Book Cliffs, as I mentioned, north of Grand Junction, they are beginning their first year here this year with captures this winter. And then we will begin our second study area, catching lions in our second study area this next upcoming winter, the winter of 2024-25. So that's essentially where we are currently at with both the lion management plan as well as our density monitoring. It's been, a lot of fun and real interesting to be involved with these density estimates and kind of get a sense for how the density estimates vary across the landscape and how similar or dissimilar they are to our habitat model, our resource selection function. And again, I would say the take home so far is that the modeled estimates that are in the lion management plan seem to be holding fairly true with our measured estimates in the study areas where we've evaluated this so far. So we'll continue. We'll get a second density estimate in Gunnison. We'll complete that work in March and hopefully have an estimate by the summer, see how that compares to the first year, and then look forward to moving on to another site and evaluating another site, likely either in the Durango area or possibly the Montrose area. So I guess with that, I'll just open it up for any questions that might be out there.
I have a question, Jamin.
Hi, Roger. Go ahead.
You said you collared 40 in the Gunnison Basin and you have 20 that are active and live. Do you know what happened to the other 20? Are you guys retrieving collars, or are they shaking collars? Are they hunter harvest? Do you know what happened there?
Right. Yep. Great question. I would say the majority of those were hunter harvest over the last couple of years. And then we've also, we've had lions die for a variety of reasons. A lot of that is hunter harvest. And so then we've had to redeploy those collars. We occasionally have lions. We've had some roadkill of lions. We've had a couple instances of lions killing other lions. A couple injury related things, probably from hunting, from them hunting, getting injured while they're hunting. But a lot of it is hunter mortality, where we've had to redeploy those collars.
Jamin and Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't one of those also an avian flu incident last winter?
That's correct. And Brandon, jump in if you would like. Yeah, we have had 1 or 2 instances of avian flu as well.
Yeah, I think we had two confirmed cases of HPAI, avian flu, and then we had 1 instance of plague mortality also.
And you guys retrieve those collars?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Jamin. I'm not seeing any questions in our chat or in the Q&A here. If Mia doesn't have any additional questions, I think we can move on to our next topic.
No, I don't have any questions.
All right. Well, thanks, Jamin. Appreciate it a lot. I believe now you may still be up for a little bit more here, but we can transition now to Brandon Diamond over in Gunnison, who's going to be giving an update on big game season structure and all the work that's going into that. And I will get those slides up here and share my screen.
Thanks, John. And I just had a few slides. This is really good timing, because for those of you that have been following the big game season structure, it's coming to a head here in the coming months with our Parks and Wildlife Commission. And so it's a good time to just get it back on everyone's radar. So you're thinking about it. And if you're interested in participating in the public process with the commission, we can talk about the timeline. So just for those that aren't as familiar with our big game season structure process, traditionally it's a 5-year cycle. So we set all of these policy decisions are on a 5-year time frame and have been for quite a while. So typically, we're planning for the next 5-year season structure as the current 5-year season structure is working through the years. So the current season structure started in 2020, and it's going to run through 2024. So we have 1 more hunting season associated with the current season structure. And then starting in 2025, we will initiate or implement our new 5-year season structure, which we've been in the planning phase here for quite some time now, actually. So with that history in mind, this season structure is very interesting and of great interest to a lot of folks, because there's some pretty high level issues on the table that we really haven't talked about or taken on in earnest anyway in the season structure. So this first slide just shows the issues that we agreed and our commission agreed to talk about during this planning process for the next season structure. The first one is the actual big game season structure cycle length. So like I was just describing, we're planning for the next season structure as the current season structure is running its course. And so there was some discussion about whether or not 5 years is the appropriate amount of time, or should there be a different season structure time frame implemented. So that's one issue we're talking about. The second issue on the screen there is what we've just lumped into what we're calling additional seasons. So for this season, most folks are used to our general seasons, our archery muzzleloader season, our 1st through 4 rifle seasons. During this season structure, we have a few novel seasons on the table. which includes an optional, and I'll stress optional, deer hunt during the first rifle season, which has traditionally been elk only over the past 15 years at least. And then an optional second pronghorn rifle season. So you would have the option of that first week of October pronghorn season, and then there'd be sort of a later in October pronghorn rifle season. And so those novel seasons, they're mostly intended to address management issues that are occurring on the ground in localized areas, and probably to a large degree shifting existing licenses around between the seasons. It's not necessarily just to create a new season where we can put more licenses in it. It's to actually, in many cases, to address specific management issues at local levels. So those are another issue we're talking about. The third category there, the administrative topics. I guess the way to summarize those or to put them in context for everybody listening is they're topics that are sort of non-controversial, local, giving us a few tools in our toolbox to just implement management objectives that are sort of ongoing. And so one example of that would be an optional late cow moose hunt. So this would be a new hunt code that you can implement. I have learned during this process that in some areas of the state, we issue a significant number of cow moose licenses. And there's been concern that those hunters are impacting bull hunters' hunting experiences during the regular moose seasons. And so the idea here is to spread hunters out and have less conflict or issues with one another. And this late cow moose hunt would be one that we could do. Most folks, 99.9% of folks you talk to support that model. And so these administrative topics are sort of those, again, non-controversial. We'll work on these and just codify them during the season structure. But most folks generally support them. Number 4 there is one we typically talk about during big game season structure, and that's the actual season structure for early seasons. So we're talking about archery and muzzleloader seasons. And so that's on the table as it traditionally is. Number 5 is also something we always talk about when we're talking about big game season structure policy, and that is the actual season structure for the regular rifle seasons. And, you know, we're talking about when the seasons happen, how long the seasons happen, how long the breaks between seasons are, all those sorts of things for our traditional standard seasons. And then number 6 there, which I think is creating a lot of interest during this planning process, is discussions about over-the-counter archery and rifle seasons, and you know what that might look like moving forward. So we're talking a lot about over-the-counter and the future of over-the-counter hunting in Colorado. So thanks, John. You can switch the slide now. And so this, I think a lot of folks have seen this timeline before, but just want to point out the red box there encompassing phase 5. That's where we're at now. And so again, this is a good time for us to talk about this because a lot of these issues are coming to a head in the next few months. And so right now, CPW staff, we've done a tremendous amount of public outreach and collected a lot of data points relative to season structure. Thanks to everybody. I know that a lot of folks on this call have spent their own time and submitted a lot of comments on this. So thanks for that. Right now, we're looking at all those data, and staff is attempting to produce some staff draft alternatives that we can put forth towards our Parks and Wildlife Commission and get the public process rolling on the commission's end. So we're in phase 5, and then next slide, John, please. More specifically, as far as public process goes, I would pay attention to the March commission meeting. That's going to be the first, basically step 1 in the commission process of approving whatever we end up approving for the next season structure. But that meeting is March 13th, 14th in Denver. And at that time, we expect that we'll provide some draft staff recommended type alternatives to the commission for their consideration. The next step will be at the May commission meeting, which is in Montrose. So it's in our backyard up here anyway, but in the Southwest region, May 1st and 2nd. And there'll probably be some refinement between the March meeting and the May meeting, after the commission's had a chance to look at it and hear from the public. And then final recommendations will be approved at the June meeting in Winter Park, which is June 12th and 13th. And so anytime between now and June 12th and 13th, the public has the opportunity to engage with the commission. They're always glad to get emails, phone calls. You can testify in person at the commission meetings. I think all of these meetings are hybrid, so if you're planning on, or if you would like to make comment virtually, you do have to sign up in advance for that, so heads up on that. If you go to the meetings in person, you can sign up for comment the day of the meeting. And otherwise, they're used to getting emails and phone calls. So that is the current big game season structure update. More to come soon. And I'm happy to answer questions, or Jamin, if you have anything to add, or Corey, if you have anything to add.
No, I appreciate it, Brandon. While we're waiting, I'll just say that we're starting to look at some of those draft regulations, at least that are at an interim review level. We call it reg review, but some of that's going to be going on. So we're going to get a start looking at some of those. So I'm excited to hear the public. Definitely be excited to hear during that commission process what the public thinks of those draft recommendations. It's a public process that I think is very important for folks to be engaged on. It's if we don't hear from you all that it directly impacts, often we think we're doing the right thing. So I think it's important that the commission and other staff hear directly from you on what you would like to see for that next 5-year season structure. So.
And for folks looking at the chat on Zoom, Leland did drop a link in there to our Engage CPW website, directs you straight to the big game season structure process, lets you know how to sign up for public comment at the commission meetings, and different ways you can have your voice heard. So I encourage folks to check out that link as well.
I can ask a question. I have a couple of items that didn't make the agenda, and one of them seems kind of appropriate here. So I'll bring it up, and it has to do with the late season dates and some local concerns about, I don't know a better way to say this, but an SHIT show around the Triangle, Almont, private property. All of the elk in the north end of the valley are migrating down valley, and second, third season seems like we're hunting winter range elk almost, and it seems like there's been a lot of issues over the last few years. You obviously, Brandon, are aware of that. I'm just curious how that would potentially affect the season structure and the dates, and if items like that get discussed in talking about dates.
So John, I'll start the answer to that, and anybody else can chime in, I guess. But I guess what I would say, Roger, is that all of those local concerns, I think we have discussed at length within our working group. And so those concerns are on the table and have been a consideration in trying to come up with a draft preferred alternative for where we land on the next one. I think we've all learned, this was a new season structure when it started. We haven't, we've been kind of doing the same season structure for quite a while. So this was way different. And so we've learned a lot as we've gone through it for the first 4 years. And I think that those discussions have been had in earnest at our working group meetings. And, at Corey's level, he's certainly aware of those concerns as well. And I think he's speaking for the Southwest region when, at his level, they're having the same conversations. And I expect that those conversations will continue all the way to the commission. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that I think options are on the table, and some of those concerns may be addressed by the commission in the new season structure when it's adopted, but we will see.
Roger, and I appreciate the question. It's a good question. And yes, to get to Brandon's point, I think I've fielded numerous phone calls from your neck of the woods, and I definitely understand the question. Brandon and I have talked about it numerous times, and I know discussions as we go through at least generating our staff recommendations to the commissions. Those are part of that conversation. So that being said, it's still, I mean, it'll get out there. I mean, it'll be out there. And hopefully that ends up aligning, the way we do. If anything we'll get out of it, is that this is definitely an opportunity to also start those discussions. Is that the state is not a one-stop shop, doesn't work for everyone. That makes sense. I think that's what you're getting at as the timing to those dates. So yes, we're having those discussions, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, and you state a point there, Corey, that the state, the state's so diverse with terrain and elevation and all sorts of different things. And, if that's dealt with from a statewide issue, it may not make sense in other places. It's kind of a local Gunnison Basin issue. I mean, maybe it exists somewhere else. And then also a second part to that, last year with the reduction of OTC tags in the Northwest, did you guys see an increase in OTC sales for places like the Gunnison Basin?
I think we were expecting some of that. And I guess I would say anecdotally, and Nick can chime in too, but I think we talked to a fair number of folks that were like, they make comments like, we've never been here. We normally hunt up north. I mean, we did hear some of that, but I think that we'll be able to take a closer look at that when the harvest data comes out for this year. We can kind of compare and contrast previous years to last year, just to see if maybe there was a bump, that could have been related to the limitations in the Northwest or the changes in the Northwest. So we'll see. We'll have a better idea when the harvest data comes out, February-ish, Jamin.
Yeah. Late February. Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say too, Roger, is that the concerns about the later season dates, I don't think are completely unique to the Gunnison Basin. I think that across the Northwest and the Southwest, there's different folks that have expressed different concerns. It may be animal distribution, it may be access to hunting camps for outfitters. It could be vulnerability of mule deer bucks during later seasons. I think we've heard the gamut, and it's not just concerns that we have here locally. I think there's shared concerns elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just about the cycle length, 5 years, and then you got a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
So that is part of the discussion.
It is. Let me type that in here, Steve.
We did have a couple questions coming in online. Ryan had asked and made a comment, climate change is messing with seasonal weather and drought. Is this being considered in the big game season structure planning process?
I'll say we just hired a new position within the state, Angela Bogue, which will be our CPW climate specialist. So I can say we're definitely starting to look at that process and look at more how a changing climate comes into play as we're looking at different season structures. So I hate to say that we're in the infancy of it, but we did make that move this year, and Angela Bogue is on staff at this time.
Now, we had a couple more questions. Luke had asked what factors other than public input are used to make CPW recommendations to the commission, and are these recommendations being affected by political pressures?
I think we normally follow and Brandon has seen a lot of those comments, but I think we've utilized our public process we've used for years, both where you can testify in person and or online, or you utilize your local CPW staff. So I can't, to address the political question, I can't say I've had any political pressure, nor do I believe staff has had any political pressure at this time moving forward in this process.
Yeah, for Mr. Klein, I guess the only thing I would add is that, certainly as the professionals tasked with carrying out our mission and making some of these decisions, I mean, we're always interested in what the public has to say, especially when we have some flexibility to do things one way or another, if our herds are performing well and we can manage things a little bit differently. So the public input is important, but I guess what I would throw out too is we also have to step back and consider going to your other factors. The reality is that there are economic issues associated with big game season structure, other herd considerations that affect season structure, local issues that affect season structure. So I think, we're basically tasked with making the sausage, and we're trying to do that to the best of our ability in the most professional way possible. But, as Corey said, I don't necessarily feel like we've experienced any political pressures related to season structure.
Appreciate it. And it's the only thing I'll add to that, just to be completely transparent, and I think everyone in probably this room or any other room or online knows that our wildlife or our Parks and Wildlife Commission is appointed by the governor. So to say it's completely out of the realm is probably not necessarily the case, but that's just to be completely transparent.
And just to address a few of the things that we have in our question and answer queue, Mike had asked about the Wolverine restoration bill and getting a draft of that. Sarah did just drop that in the Zoom chat. If folks want to find it there, they can find it. Real quick, a couple more on the big game season structure topic. I believe we had a question in Gunnison about the season structure length still being on the table, and is there support for keeping the length of 5 years if the OTC topic doesn't change?
Go ahead.
I can touch on it. And I'll say it's been somewhat of a lengthy process as far as determining what that property, whether we look at that at 5, 7, 10. I can just really talk about the discussion that has occurred, and 5 years is even a long time sometimes. So I think most of the discussion that we have had and will continue to have is that, yes, it's a lot of work on staff, but it's also at times a lot of change. So I think the driver right now is that we want to get it right. I don't say we always get it 100% right, and it's nice having that 5-year season structure. That way we can address potential issues like we've seen over the past 5. So again, just my 2 cents, but I like the shorter better than longer, even knowing that it's a ton of work on staff.
Is there any consideration of going even shorter, 2 year, 3 year?
I can't say we've had that discussion, Mia. So this process in itself typically takes, Brandon, you can correct me, 1.5 to 2.5 years, depending on topics.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think also, Mia, part of the, 5 years is enough time for people to plan and for us to actually sort of see the results manifest themselves of any management prescriptions we implement. Shorter would be harder for planning and all those different social and biological factors. But, also there's been a lot of discussion, because I can tell you in my area, there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the current season structure. And so if you end up with a season structure that may not be, whatever the right word is, acceptable, compatible with your local management situation, yeah, 5 years is a long time. And then if we extended that, if you were looking at a 10-year season structure that, wasn't necessarily supported it makes it tough. So 5 years seems to be striking that decent balance.
Yeah, in some of the conversations that I've been privy to, people who were unsatisfied were like, well, we need to change it right away. And then other people, obviously, we need time to see what happens. So I've always seen the 5 years as like a sweet spot in there, but that's why I was wondering if there's any consideration of shorter, because there wouldn't be a lot of consistency, I don't think, if things change that rapidly.
John, other questions?
Yeah, we got another question come in. It's kind of a segue a little bit into our next topic, but Ryan had asked, how the draw working group that's been formed in and now meeting kind of ties in and it kind of pairs with some of the big game season structure work.
Thanks, John. And actually, that is a good segue. I can start us off to kind of give some of the history of it, and then kick it over to Nolan, talk a little more in depth about it. But it's probably been at least, I'm guessing, about a year or so ago that we started this conversation again. It seems like every time we've had this conversation in the past, we've kind of kicked the can down the road. In the past, we've created working groups that have the ability to go to commission meetings and discuss those topics with commissioners. And I know we discussed this with our reg review team and our executive management team, and instead of just kicking this down the road, we thought it would be helpful for if we could get hopefully the right folks in a room and then have the ability to have that discussion with the commission and the public who are also interested in this topic. So that's where we formed this group in the event. Hopefully we could try to tackle some of those tougher discussions or decisions that we've kind of kicked down the road over probably the last 5 years to a decade, and just haven't really moved on some of those. So I'll kick it over to Nolan as he's part of that team that we've put together.
Thank you, Corey. So yeah, I'm gonna touch base on three things. Kind of how the group got formed, the process, how that went, topics we're covering, and then how we can get the public involved and the decision process. So there was an application period. We got over 175 applicants. We screened all those applicants from an internal review board, and then those went to the director and those were selected. So from that 175, we went to 8 public members, 2 of which are non-resident or outfitter, and then 5 resident, and then 1 sheep goat, and then 5 CPW staff. So this gets like a diverse range of stakeholders, resident, non-resident, sheep, moose, and goat, representatives that you can reach out to talk to and have your voice heard. Currently, we have 4 meeting topics. We've already had 2 of those meetings. The first one was primary draw methods, taking into consideration the pros and cons of each, existing systems. You got bonus draws, the preference point draw we have now, the weighted draw for sheep, moose, and goat, and kind of like the pros and cons of each, taking into consideration public comment. There's a diverse applicant pool in Colorado. Everybody knows some people got 0, 1, 2 points, and some people got 20, 25 or more. So how do we fit that all in to one system? The second meeting was preference points, kind of going over how points are currently used. Is there different ways they could be used? How can you encourage people to use points? Talking about status quo or any changes that we might consider. Our next meeting is weighted draw, weighted preference. Most familiar with our sheep, moose, and goat draws. Looking at how those are currently being handled, if we want a status quo, any changes we would make. The fourth meeting is how our reissue process is handled. And same thing, looking at what we have now, is it working, changes we can make. So I want to remind everybody that these are recommendations that will be took forth to the commission. So like it doesn't end with the draw group. There's still public comment periods. You can talk to your commissioners. You can, as Brandon earlier stated, and he had up on the board the commission dates And if you want to speak ahead of time, you need to sign up ahead of time. But there's opportunity for public comment. There's also the meetings are YouTube live, so you can get them off the CPW Engage site. And I also believe Leland posted that earlier in the chat, so you folks can go to that site. That's also for the big game season structure. That process is on there. So if you kind of forget what we covered, you can go look at that process online. And yeah, public comments, CPW Engaged, talking to your commissioners. And we're just looking through our options and trying to come up with a consensus goal to talk to the commissioners at the commission meetings coming up.
Do you know the first time you're meeting with the commission to
The March
meeting?
Yep.
So that'd be the March meeting is the first meeting that I would pay extreme attention to. And like Nolan talked about, you can go on there and take a look at those meetings and see what they're discussing. And then some of that strikes you good, bad, and different. I would definitely attend those meetings and be in where you can see and be part of those or that public process on commenting on the ideas that this group's coming up with. So sitting in that seat as the licensing manager for 3.5 years, our draws are very complex, probably the most complex in the state. So that's part of what this process is. They've went through a process to look at the draw itself and where we can find efficiencies. I think you'll find even that CPW staff has a hard time explaining some of our draws. There's much easier ways to really get to the same way. And, whether we're looking at different license vendors or anything like that over time, I think it's helpful that we look at our own process as well and to determine whether there's fluff that we can take out or streamline some of those and make it better. So some of those recommendations will come from this group and as well. So any questions?
Nolan, you said you were first meeting with the commissions in March. Is this coinciding with big game season structure, and will the decisions be made concurrently?
That's probably more of a question for me. And some of this, Roger, we're going to discuss tomorrow in reg review because they really do work in parallel. In other words, if you make decisions on the big game season structure side, things that come out of this draw working group could potentially affect the other. So I think we're gonna talk about some of those topics that specifically do that, and hopefully try to make those decisions on a parallel path.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't have anything to add.
I don't have anything beyond that. I would just say that seems to make sense that they would happen concurrently because one does affect the other. If OTC went away, that would have a big impact on preference points.
Yeah, certainly. When we're aware of that, and we do try to take that into consideration when we're making decisions or recommendations.
With some of when we took the applications for the working group with the 8 that you've got, what are the backgrounds? What are the stakeholders that are in that?
For the 8 public members?
Yeah.
So yeah, 5 resident, 2 non-resident outfitter, so 1 sheep and goat. So we just kind of looked at I guess I'll use the first of the non-resident outfitter, how long they've been an outfitter, how long they've been involved in that scope of work. We also looked at affiliations, how involved they've been in other conservation issues. And I would say that with all 8.
Mm-hmm.
How long they've been hunting,
Okay.
how involved they are with conservation and their skill set. And since it's a big game draw working group, how familiar they are with the CPW system and other states.
Mm-hmm. You've got some real experienced people that are in the conversation.
Yeah, I would say I've been on a lot of grading applicants. We had 175, I think it was 177 somewhere in there, and they were extremely solid, and largely we all came to the same consensus. So I was pretty proud of that. They kind of all nailed down the same people that had similar goals, and there's a lot to choose from. So I think the people that are selected are the right people, and they reflect the interest of the different member groups.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but our 3 Parks and Wildlife commissioners that represent sportsmen are also attending and listening to that conversation. Is that correct?
Correct. There's also 3 commissioners. Thank you.
Any other questions, John?
No, I believe that's all the questions on this. Did note one comment in here that we'll relay and just again encourage folks to go to that Engage CPW link that's in the chat and provide more of their comments in here as well. I know Alex has another question in the Q&A that Sarah's looking at. We may get to once we get more to the roundtable, but don't want to go backwards on the agenda right now. So in the interest of that, we'll move forward with the wolf reintroduction update. And Corey and Jamin, I know y'all are going to handle this, but I'll pass it over to whoever wants to start.
Jamin, I can go ahead and start, and both you and Matt can correct me if I get anything wrong. But I think we're all aware that in 2020, Proposition 114 passed. That what that really did was create Colorado statute that lined out what CPW was tasked with, and we were tasked with creating a management plan that would provide for the management of wolves to include the release. It provides for a compensation plan, and then that this would start no later than December 31st of 2023. Moving forward a little bit, our management plan was passed, I believe, in last May, along with regulations that coincide with that management plan. That I can't count the amount of public meetings that we had during that time frame. I can't say enough to definitely some of the Southwest region staff that attended all or most of those, including Matt Thorpe and Luke Hoffman with our game damage program. Moving forward a little bit further, we went into an agreement, or we reached out to numerous states and reached an agreement with Oregon to get 10 wolves. We went up there this winter and did that. I can't remember exactly which order. I think it was 5 in the first group, and then something like 2-1-2 or something like that. But a total of 10 wolves. They were relocated to the Northwest region. They just to give a little bit of what's happened since then. They've mostly stayed in that general area. We've had some, or at least one, move south towards I-70 corridor and decide that wasn't the direction they wanted to go. We've had pairs kind of mix match across. I mean, if you look from really east to west or west to east, we've had a couple animals decide that they liked another wolf on the other side of the relocation area, and vice versa. We haven't had any depredations since those have been released, but we have one animal that has been hazed pretty well and decided to make a jaunt east. Of course, not being up in the Northwest, I don't have the exact data, so I basically get the same map y'all are looking at, you all are looking at right now, and that's a map that you will see updated monthly on our website that shows current areas that are drainages that the wolves are active in. So over time, you see that contracting on where the wolves have been in the last 30 days. Basically, what it'll do is as they go into those drainages, it'll highlight it. And then we will take that map and put it on our website so folks know what areas are active, or at least has been active over that last 30 days. What we've also done up in the Northwest is I know local staff, when they know animals are sticking around certain areas for numerous days, it's kind of key in those district wildlife managers and AWMs to go out and have conversations with landowners to let them know that there's activity in closer proximity instead of just handing them this map and saying there's somewhere in here. So we are trying to work with landowners as it relates to that. What we're also doing is I truly wholeheartedly believe that CPW is very good at what we do, but we're not perfect. This is the first. Well, I won't say it's the first. It's the first in a long time we've done a relocation or a reintroduction like this. So we got a lot of things right, and a few things not completely right, or at least not desirable, and we can be better. So we're currently right now doing after action internally to determine what we can do better for next year. Currently, right now, we have an agreement with the Colville tribe in Washington, I believe, for 15 wolves. We could have, or the director could have made the decision to go ahead and go for 5 more wolves. This has been an arduous task, a tiring task to staff, to all that's involved, to landowners on the ground. So we collectively made the decision that we could pause this until next year and learn what we can learn, do better next year, be able to do outreach to those landowners, be there for the public, and try to do the best job we can do on the ground. So what we will start here shortly is, and really we already have, but the planning process for next year's relocation of those animals from that Colville tribe to Colorado, and amongst that do the outreach needed that we're probably going to be determining through that after action, and make sure that we check more boxes than we did this time. So that kind of gets us through where the proposition passed to current. So we can try to address any questions if there's any out there. Or Jamin, if I missed anything, or Matt for that matter.
Yeah, that was great, Corey. That's a good summary. I did notice there's a question or comment in the chat relative to what the wolves have been killing and eating, and that's certainly something that we'll be monitoring moving forward. All of the wolves that we're bringing in are GPS radio collared, and so in the future we'll be monitoring populations pretty closely. We'll be monitoring reproductive success, heading into the spring. The wolves that were brought in should be mating and denning in the coming months. Well, probably starting about now, and over the next couple months, and we'll be monitoring reproductive success, denning success, to see how many litters of pups we have this upcoming year. We'll be monitoring wolf predation rates as well, and kill composition. So we'll be monitoring what they're killing and eating, and how often, along with a lot of other demographic variables, wolf survival, and then obviously space use and habitat use and dispersal across the state, as well as they do so. And then, as Corey said, planning for another 15 wolves coming in from Washington for next winter. We also have research projects that will be ongoing, evaluating predator-prey dynamics between wolves and deer and elk, moose, and then monitoring the impacts that wolves are having on livestock operations as well.
With the wolves that were already here before the release in December, there were instances of depredation with those livestock owners, have they been working with the management plan and filing claims already? And how is that going?
And Matt may need to touch on this one, but to the best of my knowledge of the remaining 2 wolves, we haven't had any depredations since we've released the 10.
Right, but prior to that.
Prior to that, I don't have that or that information necessarily. Which wolf is tied to anything? I can get it, Mia, and have no problem getting it out of if we have the information to this group as well. But I know that over time they've been part of a pack that has depredated. As I'm sure you've read the email that come from the director asking for us to remove those wolves. A lot of things were taken into consideration for the director to make that decision. That pack dynamic has changed greatly, and depredations have also changed considerable. Compared to when that pack was a whole. I think, and I don't know which wolf it was. I know there's been at least 3 sheep that at some point in the past were taken by one of those wolves, but I would have to do a little research to not speculate on that. So.
And are all the tools Jamin said something, or one of you guys said about the hazing that moved the one westward or eastward. Are the tools are all being implemented and everybody's utilizing the flattery and everything else?
And to be honest, again, without checking, I don't believe we have any flattery out right now. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a specific, they saw the wolf amongst cattle, hazed it for the 10J, and it went about as fast as it could east, and I haven't heard of any issues since that hazing event. So I'm happy to say it in that case that hazing has worked, and that's good.
Hey, Corey, this is Matt. Sorry, I'm working with Leland behind the scenes here tonight. Yeah, and to answer Mia's question, the tools are available, but at this point, like fladry, we have some projects that are going to start a little bit closer to the calving season. So kind of mid to late March is when those guys in North Park are going to start doing some of those projects. And I also know that, excuse me, our staff are working with producers in Middle Park, trying to identify where, once we see where the wolves are kind of settling in more, that'll inform where it would make sense to try to work with those producers. So I think we're at this point really just trying to make producers aware of what the tools are, when, the context they would work best. And then once we see what the wolves are doing more, then that's going to help us decide, okay, let's, use fox lights here. Let's set up fladry there based on how people's operations work. And also the question about compensation. I know our folks in the field have been working with the producers that lost like the sheep. And then I think Mr. Gittleson lost another, maybe a yearling or something. And definitely, yeah, we're working through the process for compensation as well.
I think the only thing I'll add is, and Matt touched on part of it, but as far as having the non-lethal actions we can do out there, we have Adam Baca up there in North Fork. Currently, right now, we're approved to hire 5 new damage specialists. 3 of those are going to be hopefully hired fairly soon. 2 of them will probably be along that or be placed along that I-70 corridor to help out staff in responding if we need to. And then it looks like hopefully the 3rd one we're going to put down in that Gunnison country just so they can start to get to know folks and help out at least for a while, probably more on the education side, and then running up north and if there's any help needed up there. And then we've also separated wolf damage from big game damage. So wolf damage will be housed under the terrestrial section, and they should be hiring hopefully a wolf damage coordinator here in the recent future as well. So.
We had another question come in the chat, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Bill was asking how far south toward New Mexico will reintroduce Colorado gray wolves be able to roam. I believe in September we had signed an agreement with New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah that those states could relocate roving northern gray wolves back to Colorado. But if anybody has any more input on that, we got that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly there is some concern about how reintroduced gray wolves will interact with Mexican wolves that exist in New Mexico and Arizona and are fairly widespread across those states at this point. There may be some potential relocations of collared wolves that move south of the Colorado border, or as John mentioned, west of the Colorado border into Utah in the future. But obviously, at some point in time, we're going to end up with a lot of naturally reproducing uncollared wolves in Colorado that are going to be dispersing. Historically, those wolves would have, Mexican wolves and gray wolves would have overlapped somewhat or come to they would have been in close proximity to each other. I don't know that we as a state have plans to restrict gray wolf movement. As the state of Colorado, I don't think we have any plans of restricting gray wolf movement. I think there is a little bit of uncertainty yet as to exactly how that will play out as gray wolves disperse into New Mexico and begin to encounter federally endangered Mexican wolves in Arizona and New Mexico. But that's a good question. But historically there would have been some sort of overlap there and a gradient there between those two species. But there can be issues with competition there, as well as inbreed or not inbreeding, hybridization between the two species.
And another question had come in from Gunnison regarding locations for releases for wolves captured during the second capture season. I believe a lot of those conversations are still ongoing, but the circled zones have been well published regarding areas considered for wolf releases. But if Corey or Jabin wanted to dive more into that at all, where we're at with that planning process.
I can touch on it. With starting north of I-70 and in the Northwest region, I think the goal is that we make sure that we've supplemented that population well enough. So I can't say we've made any decisions on where this next round of wolves will go. That's part of that planning process that I started about, but I'm pretty confident that we want to make sure that we have the right amount of wolves up north and that they're doing well. So I'm sure that'll be the priority before we have discussions of moving further south. And don't take that as we won't have those discussions. We haven't yet. We should start having those shortly, and hopefully be able to have those conversations locally as well.
Yeah, and I suspect some of that conversation will revolve around reproductive success of the 10 wolves that were reintroduced this winter. So we'll be monitoring that here over the coming months. And I suspect that, as Corey mentioned, the location site for the relocation of wolves next winter will largely be impacted by survival of the current 10 wolves that were brought in, as well as their reproductive success this spring.
All right. Well, no more questions on that topic. And if they do come in, we've got some time here. But wanted to transition to more of the items that I know Roger had mentioned, a few of his items he wanted to discuss that weren't laid out here in the agenda, but some time here to roundtable with our staff and our caucus representatives with any items they'd like to dive deeper into. I guess, Roger, since you had mentioned a few of those earlier, we'll start with you tonight.
So one that brought to my attention recently, and I haven't talked to Brandon about it, I know you know about it. BLM trail closures coinciding with antler shed hunt dates. Are you aware of that? I don't understand it completely. I'm thinking it was that those dates were different, and the BLM has trail closures out on BLM property, but antler shed hunt season opens during the trail closure. So that wasn't really making sense to have people hunting antlers in a trail closure area.
Yeah, and we can talk more offline about it too, Roger. I'm guessing this is related to Signal Peak.
I think Signal Peak is probably a big part of it.
Yeah, and that is related to the Gunnison Sage Grouse RMP amendment that's currently pending.
And that's why the trail closures.
Well, the Signal Peak area, and it's a long story, but there are currently seasonal closures out there for different time periods and different users, that were created. Some of the folks in the room might have had a hand in some of that, but, right now with the RMP amendment being open, there's a lot of discussion about the timing of those closures and whether they're hitting the sweet spot between all users and competing uses. And so with sage grouse, the closures tend to be longer. So into May, or in some instances, actually into July, or through June for brood rearing. And shed antler hunting season opens on May 1st across the West Slope. And so it's a complicated topic, and we'll talk more about it, but it's a recreational area, meets shed antler hunting, meets sage grouse, meets deer and elk. A complicated issue here locally.
Yeah, and you brought my mind back around to it. And so I think the issue is we're closing trails on the BLM, which is an actual trail, but if people are crisscrossing the ground looking for shed antlers during a sage grouse closure, that didn't really make sense.
Right, yeah, and so, from a CPW perspective, if we're advocating for a seasonal closure for wildlife, in most instances, we're advocating for a total human closure. And so there's more to the conversation than may meet the eye. This one's a little bit complicated because of its current situation, but yeah, if we're looking to give maximum protection to deer and elk or sage grouse, we tend to go with our standard recommendations of total human closures, just like some of our state wildlife areas. We don't let shed antler hunters on our state wildlife areas till they're open to all users. And so,
is that a different date than May 1st?
May 1st is our typical recommendation. Yeah.
Okay. The only other topic I had was, and I could do this offline, was the 521 GPS collar study data and where that stood. I know Evan Phillips was involved with a lot of that, and I could take that offline. James, and I could call you. I know, we talked about and how that affects license numbers. We talked about going to getting the license numbers to a point where archery second choice could draw that tag, and we went with a lighter reduction last year. So that's kind of a complicated issue too, and I can follow up, Jamin, with you or Evan or Brandon tomorrow or next week.
You bet, Roger. And Evan has actually put together a presentation that we could either share with this group or offline. I think maybe Brandon has seen some or all of that presentation, but anyway, Evan does have a presentation put together that kind of summarizes the GMU 521 elk collaring project to date, and movement and distribution of those animals, and sample size of collared animals, and all of that. And so that presentation is ready to go. We just need to start getting it out to folks.
Yeah.
That's all I had for my additional subjects, John.
Thanks, Roger. And Mia, did you have anything else you wanted to run by?
No, I don't really. There's a ton of issues going on, but I think what you guys took from our topics were a good, important issues.
Very good. I did want to circle back. We had a couple of questions that we didn't get to, and one interesting one that just came up from Ryan, and maybe Jamin, you could help a little bit with this, or unfortunately, we don't have Karen Fox or Mary Wood, our great wildlife health pathologists who do such great work out of the Fort Collins office on here. But Ryan had mentioned that there was some new research that recently came out about cervid I never know how to say it, prions being able to jump to humans recently. Is there a plan being developed with the CDC or Colorado Department of Health and Human Services to monitor and respond to a potential jump of CWD into humans, and link to some to some stuff here? But I don't know if anybody has anything on that, but just thought we'd close that question.
Well, it's a good question. It's certainly something that and I wish we had our wildlife health folks on, people like Karen Fox and Mary Wood, as John mentioned. It's something that I think is being evaluated across the West and probably worldwide. I guess I would clarify there's no actual evidence yet that CWD or those prions can jump to humans. There is some evidence that in the right situation, maybe they can jump to other primates. We've certainly never seen a jump to humans yet, and hopefully we never do. But that is, clearly a concern and something that people are monitoring and keeping a close eye on and researching. So I'm not sure that I have a whole lot of information other than that. Hopefully we never do see a jump to humans. So far we never have. But I think what Ryan's referring to is some research that indicates that maybe in the right situations, maybe it could jump to other primates, which is, at that point becoming a concern. So I'm not sure I have much more to add other than that. Certainly our wildlife health folks, our vet staff are, it's something that they're keenly interested in and monitoring closely.
And then backtracking to our YouTube as well, I want to thank all of our folks who have been watching on YouTube all night as we kind of manage jumping back and forth here between the Zoom and our YouTube folks. But going back to some of our licensing questions, Chris had asked, is stopping over the counter for non-residents being considered? And he said he, just added the comment that he believes that contributes to a lot of the pressure.
I can give the short answer, and yes, it is being considered.
Yeah, that's a good short answer. Yeah, certainly throughout the big game season structure process and this whole process, whether it's season structure or the draw working group, there's been a number of topics. Certainly, limitation of over the counter licenses is being heavily discussed for elk, and there's a couple of different ways that could be done, right? One would be a full limitation, similar to what we've done for deer. Seems to have worked pretty well for deer in Colorado, just being fully limited for archery rifle across the board. There's another model being discussed, which is limiting non-residents only. And those conversations are certainly being had, and ultimately I think that's going to come down to a decision for the Wildlife Commission to make. I don't know if Brandon wants to add anything else.
No, I think you guys got it.
Ron Goodrich just added the comment in here to that while that may be considered, the residents need to remember that it takes 13 residents to replace one non-resident license fee. I'm not seeing any more questions in here, but I did want to give Dave Dillon a chance. He had raised his hand in here. If you wanted to put a question in the chat or in the Q&A, we can keep this up for just a second and see if he gets that in. All right. Not seeing anything. Do want to just thank our caucus representatives once again for joining us at our respective offices in Gunnison and Durango, as well as all of our staff here today for the conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Corey, Mia, and Roger if they have any closing remarks before we close it down for the night.
Anything?
I just want to say thank you and thanks to the commissioners and senators and whoever, maybe representatives that might be attending. I appreciate you guys tuning in and look forward to hopefully seeing you guys at meetings.
Yeah, I don't have anything additional. I think, thanks for everybody that attended. I see the little number in the corner of the screen was up to 42 at one time. I think that's a pretty good number. I don't know that we've seen that many people before.
And
Yeah,
again,
we've consistently had a bunch of people on our YouTube tonight. Want to thank them as well. And just real quick before I turn it back over to Corey, Patrick had raised his hand. Patrick did answer your question in the chat here earlier regarding that boat ramp at Williams Creek Reservoir State Wildlife Area, and Wildlife Officer Nate Martinez will be responding to you first thing tomorrow morning about some of your concerns with that ramp and dock being removed. So we'll make sure to get that over to you first thing in the morning, Patrick.
thanks, John. And again, thanks, Mia, Roger. And I'll also throw a thank you out there to Dave Dillon. He's on our Habitat Stamp Committee. So does great work on lands that we conserve throughout the state. So Dave, if you're listening, please feel free to give me a call if we didn't answer a question for you. So with that being said, again, I think John and others have said it. I appreciate those that have attended either in person, online, or on YouTube. So please continue to help us understand the needs of not only the state, Southwest region, and let us know if there's anything we could do. So appreciate it again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as we wrap up tonight, just let folks know, usually we have these meetings every 6 months or so. The next one will be summer, usually about July, for our next region Sportspersons Caucus. Just encourage folks, if you have topics you'd like to see included in our next agenda, reach out to Mia or Roger or to any of us here at CPW and let us know what topics you'd like us to talk most about. But again, appreciate everybody attending, and we'll shut it down for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.